Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for what is our official launch of Tyk 5.8. Now, of course, the product has been available for you for a while now, so you may have already played around with it, but this is essentially for you to get to know all about what's part of this release, as well specifically about what we've got in store for you from an open API perspective. We're calling this release the Open API by default release, essentially, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. There is a degree of security, interoperability, governance first, API experience, all of those different things will be talked about as we go along. This is a little bit of the agenda, what we've got in store for you today. Obviously, we'll be talking about Tyk 5.8. We'll be picking out the top 3 things that you should probably consider immediately. There is obviously a laundry list of different capabilities that you can find out a little bit more about using our release notes. We'll talk about, firstly, the new Tyk Cloud onboarding experience and what that is. Obviously, experience matters quite a lot, especially when you're getting started for the first time. The way you experience the product matters quite a lot. So you want to make sure that experience is as intuitive and as seamless as possible. Well, obviously, the main event of today, the main highlight of today is going to be all about OpenAPI by default. We'll be talking again about these enhanced security capabilities that we brought in, governance first approaches, testing, automation, a little bit about artificial intelligence and AI agents as well, and how some of open standards like these sort of ladder up to those capabilities from a future readiness standpoint as well. We'll dive into the demo, which is obviously going to be very, very exciting, led by Andy. It will be your time to experience 5.8. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about what's next and how you can get started and experience Tyk 5.8 for the very first time if you haven't already done so. With that quick introduction, I am Buddha. I'm the Director of Product Ecosystem. It's the first time I'm using that title since the update. So that is me, and I'm going to be a host of today's session. Additionally, I'm also the board chair of the OpenAPI initiative. So this particular release is doubly exciting for me from both aspects here, both from the OpenAPI standpoint as well as from a Tyk standpoint. Joining me is Andy. Andy, perhaps a short introduction, who's going to be taking us through the demo and pretty much just being the person responsible behind this release altogether. So, Andy, quick introduction.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Andy Ost, I'm Senior Product Manager here at Tyk. As Buddha said, I look after this release and most of the core API management functionality within Tyk. So been really working hard with the team. They've been unbelievable how much that they've done for this release for you all. And looking forward to presenting it to you in a few minutes.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andy. All right, just a little bit of housekeeping before we move along. There is a Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, most likely. So if you have a question, feel free to ask. There is also a chat section that is available and open to everybody in the audience. So once again, if you want to use the chat, feel free to do so. Interact with each other if you wish to do so, or with us. And if you've got a question, put that through the Q&A section as well. There will be a couple of polls as we go along, so I will give you a bit of a heads up before I go ahead and launch the poll. It's just a quick sense check of where you are today in your open API journey, as well as how we can help you as part of the next steps. So with that, let's talk a little bit about a new release. Now, whenever there is a new release that comes up in Tyk, it is an opportunity, it's a moment of celebration, not because of a feeling of, oh, we are finally done with this and we can move on to the next thing, but it's a celebration because ultimately a new release is a culmination of collaboration. What I mean by that, it is essentially a combination of people, process, and sort of input points, looking to build different collaboration capabilities, looking to enhance the experience and helping you guide you towards API success. So when we talk about people, we are looking at like a whole range of teams, obviously driven by the product and engineering teams, but there is also inputs from the commercial teams, the marketing teams, from the support teams, from the user experience teams, all of them coming together to actually develop a release like this. There is a process which includes a bit of research, a bit of feedback, a bit of design, development, testing, deployment, and obviously marketing, obviously sales enablement. All of these different elements come together as well from a process standpoint. And last but not least, of course, sort of the inputs that goes into a particular release, specifically something like this, where we're obviously speaking to our customers to understand where their current pain points are. We're speaking to prospects, we're speaking to community experts, we are looking at users, we are looking at leads, we are looking at where the competitive landscape is going, as well as how can we drive the API ecosystem forward. So all of that ultimately culminates into this sort of mapping of capabilities and experiences, usually an intersection of both of those things that leads to the success of the product, and by virtue of which the success of our users in solving very specific problems that have been keeping them up at night. So the ultimate question then that we ask at every release is, how do we make our users' lives a little bit better? Maybe we are solving not all of the problems perhaps, but maybe even a small subsection of that. If we can make our users' lives just that little bit better with each release, we would consider that to be a success. Therefore, a new release is new opportunity, both for us to understand a little bit more about the market, to test out a couple of new capabilities, to test out our own thinking, and hopefully a new opportunity for our end users as well to find new ways to solve problems that have been troubling them for a long time, and hopefully move from a problem to a solution towards success. That, to us, is a moment of celebration, not simply because we are done and dusted with another release and we can move on to the next one. The celebration because we have hopefully helped make our users' lives a little bit better by virtue of doing this particular launch and these set of capabilities. With that, I want to introduce you to the world of Tyk 5.8. So we'll be starting off with what it is and why it matters. There are a few key elements that we'll be talking about. Obviously, as I said, there is a laundry list of different abilities that we have brought in, a few different features that we have introduced. All of those will be available, are available as part of the release notes, but I've pretty much handpicked three key areas that might be worth talking about. Of course, the highlight of today is going to be OAS by default, or OpenAPI by default. We'll definitely be spending a lot more time with that, including the demo itself. But there are a couple of other capabilities that I thought might be worth spending a little bit more time with. So the second, first, obviously the OAS by default. Then we've got an onboarding experience to talk about a little bit. I'll touch upon that shortly. Let me start off with the one right at the end of the column here, which is the developer experience and usability aspect. So this is probably an easy one. If you have been a developer, if you have been using, well, any sort of development products in the API space today, what we have introduced here is how you can work interchangeably with YAML and JSON formats, both of those, which I'm pretty happy about. Whether you're using that to update your API definitions or using that to work with our Tyk operators, all of that is now seamlessly workable through these different formats. So once again, happy days if you're a developer who cares about this. And as far as our community research goes, we know that you do. So with that, there is an additional element of that usability where we have the user audit logs now available through dashboard. Once again, we'll touch a little bit more upon that, what that means from the context of OpenAPI, as well as some of the experiences that we are talking about. So really short, but sweet introduction, hopefully, towards that specific developer experience and usability aspects. Then let's move on to this onboarding experience that we talked about. There is obviously two parts to this. There is an onboarding experience, or there is an overall user experience that is catered towards the OpenAPI as part of things, which we will showcase and demo. But additionally, we've also introduced a brand new onboarding experience on Tyk Cloud. So for anyone who is perhaps new to Tyk, Tyk Cloud is the easiest, the fastest way for you to experience Tyk for first time. If you're trialing Tyk out, this is probably the best way, the easiest way for you to get started and experience all of the different capabilities that Tyk has to offer today. But even beyond the trial list, Tyk Cloud is one of the most powerful ways in which you can use Tyk across without having to take on the burden of managing the infrastructure at your organization. So with that, this new onboarding experience provides a quick start wizard for the very first time users of Tyk dashboard on Tyk Cloud. You can deploy an API with just a few clicks. You can test it out within the platform itself. And then you can use some of our own examples that we have now provided, which are hosted by Tyk, to actually get started further. The benefits of obviously doing this is to provide a big user-friendly, intuitive onboarding experience, and hopefully move you towards that faster time to value journey that most of our users tell us they care about. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea. If you're trying out Tyk Cloud for the very first time, you will experience this firsthand, and you will see that the setup time is no longer, well, not no longer, but the new setup time is much, much faster and much, much easier to get started. With that, I'm going to go straight into the main event of today, which is going to be the Open API by default aspect. So in short, what that really means is that we are going to be talking about the feature parity of OAS and what that actually means and entails as we go along. Before that, just a quick poll before we get started, just to get a bit of an understanding of the room to where you are in your Open API journey. So I'm going to launch a short poll that just asks you about, are you currently using Open API specification or not? So feel free to tell us where you are in that particular journey. So depending on your response, you'll be able to understand whether some of these benefits are already valuable for you, or if you have not considered this yet or are considering using OpenAPI, perhaps some of these values will be beneficial for you to make up your mind. So the value of OpenAPI specification specifically, it's one of the most popular open standards out there that provides a blueprint for API development as well as API management. It lends a huge degree of interoperability by virtue of being that open standard and providing standardized ways of designing APIs. It also leads to faster and more seamless integrations, given that you pretty much all the tools that are natively supporting OpenAPI now have a common language for interaction. There is a rich tooling landscape that you can make the most out of without having to go into the detail of custom integrations and managing middleware for each one of those different systems that you need to cater to. And if you think about it from an enterprise standpoint, this matters quite a lot because when it comes to building out your API platforms, it's seldom just a single thing that forms your entire API platform. There is usually an integrated stack that you're going to be working with, where you've got tools that look into security. Specifically, you might be looking at tools that look specifically into observability. So open standards by default are very, very valuable there. Open API, in this case, from a security governance automation standpoint, are very, very valuable. Some of the benefits of Open API specification are on the right-hand side. I'm not going to go through all of those different details, but you can see how it touches upon a lot of different areas, a lot of different elements that would be very, very valuable when you are thinking about APIs and developing and designing as well as deploying APIs. There is also the aspect of developer experience here. So as a developer, if you've already been using tools that support OpenAPI natively, you can continue doing that now when you're working with tools like Tyk as well, because once again, open standards, it's a huge experience enhancer for documentation. There is, again, as I said, elements of testing, deployment, and automation that comes into the picture. All of this is to say, once again, that there is this significant enhancement of time to value when it comes to using OpenAPI as a spec by itself, but equally using it together with this rich tooling ecosystem, hopefully cohesively governed by Tyk as a platform. So that's what we're going to be talking about next. Which brings us to the timeline of Tyk's OAS evolution. So this isn't the first time that we are talking about OpenAPI specification and our native support for OpenAPI. Very early on, we provided early access. Once again, if you think back to the process of how a release works, we really, really value getting feedback as early and as often as possible. So we started with early access right at the beginning. And since then, the very first big release, first big launch of this OAS capability or OS native support came in Tyk 5.3. Some of you might have already experienced it. Some of you might already be using this. This is where we said we are OS mature at that point, which essentially meant that there were two ways of creating your API definition. There is the Tyk classic API definition that still exists and was existing at that point. But now you also had at the point of 5.3, you had this Open API as another alternative to delivering your API definitions or using the Tyk's capabilities across the board. At that point of time, I think our coverage was somewhere around that 80 to 90%. Most of the use cases were covered at that point of time. But that was pretty much our first initial beginning of this offering. We then led down to 5.7, which was our previous release, which was primarily catered towards streams, but equally with this, that was more of a supportive release towards this main release of 5.8, where we introduced a couple of additional capabilities from a security and governance standpoint, which finally led us to Tyk 5.8, where we are now at the point of parity, where OpenAPI is the default way in which you experience Tyk. OpenAPI is the default way with which you can create your API definitions in Tyk. We're not taking away Tyk classic API definition in case you're concerned about that, but by default, the way everything that you can achieve with Tyk Classic's API definition can now be done using OpenAPI. In fact, in certain cases, there are specific features that we'll talk about that are available only with Tyk OAS. So what does that mean? Tyk OpenAPI by default here, as I said, we are now at a point of feature parity. Every gateway capability, which was originally available through Tyk's classic API definition, can now be configured using Tyk OAS. There is support that we have now launched for multi-part open API descriptions with 5.8 as well. If you are already familiar with this, back when OAS 3.0 was first launched, there was this support for multi-parts where you can essentially have your single unified document with where you're essentially starting off, but there are multiple smaller parts where you can host different aspects of your definition that can be brought together using references. So we now have full support for that with 5.8. We've also made migration very, very straightforward. So if you're already using classic API definition with Tyk, we now have direct migration support for you using the dashboard API and GUI as well. So we'll touch a little bit more upon that as well. But we made that really, really easy for you to switch if you're already using the classic definition. Obviously, generation of API docs becomes even more easy and seamless, which you might have already experienced previously, but it's even more enriched at this stage. And the thing that has always been unique about our offering, Tyk's offering of this open API, this native support, has been the fact that we don't just consume and transform your document, but essentially retaining the original integrity of the open API specification, the open API document itself. We're essentially adding on to that so that at any point of time, if you were to integrate with other platforms, other solutions, or even move away, hopefully never, from Tyk, you would be able to do so without having to extract or find another way to revisit or figure out how to get back your original API document. We retain the integrity of the document, which is not what a lot of the other tools might be able to say here. So that's something that is very, very valuable. Once again, you've told us this matters to you. We've made sure that that's been consistent over the period of time. Now, let's go into a couple of these specific capabilities. Obviously, you'll see some of these in action very, very shortly once I pass things over to Andy. One of the capabilities that we introduced actually back in 5.3 was this concept of API templates. This was part of our governance enhancements that we had brought in. So what are API templates in case you're unfamiliar with it? API templates were meant to be, well, as the name suggests, templates for quicker and faster API creation. It provides a starting point for new APIs. It helps you pre-fill certain fields within your API definition. It creates a template. You can essentially use an existing API to create these templates. And again, we'll see that in action shortly. And more importantly, this is also a very Tyk OAS exclusive feature that you need to be aware of. From a benefit standpoint, if you're a platform team, then this will provide you templated APIs that you can provide to your development teams with set governance standards. For example, for authentication methods or anything else that you want to have sort of standardized across different development teams. For developers now, they don't need to know a whole lot about the specifics of Tyk and every single aspect of the API definition and API configuration. They just need to provide the open API description, and the template will be able to do the rest in this case. And whatever the platform teams enables to be configured by the developers, they might just be able to do that. And that's all they really need to do anyway to achieve the outcomes that they want. So that's your API templates. Very, very powerful capability. Once again, speaks to API governance, speaks to developer experience, speaks to some of the outcomes that we are looking for towards the faster time to value aspect as well. Just a quick snapshot of what that might look like. If you're creating a new API using the Tyk platform, you would see these sort of API templates showing up at the bottom of your screen here. And if you already have pre-created API templates, you'll be able to use those to create your API as you go along. Once again, you'll see this live as we go along as well. The second part of this was API security. This is something that's new that we've introduced as part of 5.8. This is enhanced. We sort of touched upon this just a little bit in 5.7, but it's now available for everybody here in 5.8, where we have provided enhanced upstream authentication capabilities, which means You can integrate with upstream services that are primarily secured with basic authentication or Auth 2.0's client credentials. We have support for the password grant as well, but if you are familiar with this particular aspect of OAuth 2.0, this is now considered legacy as a password grant. It's not something that is industry practice anymore or industry standard anymore. So if you're new to this, I would probably just avoid this altogether. But we do have to deal with certain legacy customers, ultimately legacy users, where that migration might be still in progress. But we have, obviously, we've got support for all of those in case that's something that you care about. Once again, an exclusive Tyk OAS capability for you. The benefit here, obviously, is to integrate Tyk securely with third-party services, primarily dedicated towards the platform teams. All right. Moving right along, a nice, cool experience to be enhanced here was the testing and debugging experience, that we now have a whole new way in which we've replaced the old Tyk Classic API debugger. It's a lot more user-friendly, a lot more intuitive, and provides you with better details for your own understanding from a testing and debugging standpoint. Right now, this is at an MVP level from a 5.8 standpoint, with plans to be enhanced much more in the future. Obviously, it's going to be a work in progress, but it also means that there is an opportunity for you to provide us with a little bit more details, your feedback in terms of what would you like to see more of in this particular arena. You can view and make changes to the APIs, keeping the test interface on screen. Again, you will see a couple of elements of this perhaps while we are doing the demo if time permits. This is an exclusive feature of Tyk OAS APIs. What this means, again, from a benefit standpoint, is that there is an enhanced experience when you're testing and debugging APIs, and you can stay within the Tyk platform as opposed to having to go through other testing interfaces like Postman to be able to make sense of all of this. So hopefully that enhances that overall experience. Once again, makes your life a little bit easier when you're working in this particular environment. Then finally, we talk about a little bit about API automation as well, where while what you will see today in terms of the demo, a lot of that is going to be available through the dashboard, the graphic user interface itself, and obviously that's very, very intuitively designed. It's something to experience and obviously enjoy. There's a lot of those configurations capability that comes there, but equally at the same time, we are ultimately API first. So all the capabilities that you see today are also going to be available through APIs. What that means is that you can integrate seamlessly with your existing CI/CD pipelines, or to create or build your own powerful CI/CD workflows as you go along. This is going to be available with Tyk Operator as well. So once again, if that's a setup that you might already have previously, then you can very easily either enrich that, enhance that, or work together with it. Otherwise, if you're starting off for the very first time, then it's very easy for you to do those setups as well. So from an API, open API standpoint, it's easy to set up, extensive, and works across an integrated stack, considering it's an open standard we are talking about. Which leads us to the demo. Obviously, there's one final point that I just wanted to touch upon. It feels like there isn't going to be a conversation anymore with anything to do with APIs without touching a little bit upon sort of the world of AI agents, and LLMs. And I just wanted to make a small note, because I don't want to derail this conversation too much. There's a small note about the importance and value of open standards like OpenAPI specifications, specifically in the world of AI agents, and how your APIs are being consumed by AI agents and LLMs at this point of time. So open standards like OpenAPI essentially provide that deterministic description, or a description language essentially, for the consumption of your APIs in a much better way, so that now that there is a standardized way for APIs to be designed and developed and made available to AI agents, the ultimate purpose of agents would be to understand the intent of what that API is, and to respond back based on the task that it has been associated or assigned, instead of trying to figure out what's really going on within your API definition, especially when it would have to deal with multiple proprietary API definitions all along. So OpenAPI, again, a very, very powerful aspect of being AI ready in today's world, where you're really the first step of AI readiness, as we've touched upon previously in previous webinars. The first step of AI readiness today is API governance and API management, all of that standardized across open standards. So that sort of a setup is what sets you up for success in the world of AI readiness. pair that with AI governance, which was the point of our previous webinar around Tyk Studio, and then you're looking at the real productivity of AI adoption and the real outcomes that you're after as a business. You need both of those elements to come together. So Tyk 5.8, as of this release, hopefully enhances that experience even further, makes life a lot more easier, not just from a design of an API standpoint, but the end-to-end management of APIs using OpenAPI specification. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and send this back to Andy for our first look, if you haven't already experienced 5.8 of our product. Over to you, Andy.
Thanks, Buddha. So I'm going to, hi again, everybody. I'm going to try and show you a few of the flows involved in Unlocked in 5.8 and just the experience of working with OpenAPI spec with Tyk. So what I've got here is a very simple example of an OpenAPI description. And it's got a number of different endpoints. It's the designers recommending that we use the API key authentication method. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create this as a new API in Tyk. So all I need to do is click on Add New API and import. So I'm going to import of type OpenAPI. I'm going to pick up that file. And now we have the option to choose the listen path that we're going to be responding to. And then these automatic configuration options are one of the powerful features of Tyk when it comes to working with OpenAPI spec, because Tyk will actually automatically interpret the schema. It will interpret the security scheme selected, and we can restrict access just to the paths defined in that API description. So what I'll do there is I'll import that API. It's created an API. It's published it on my gateway that's running here on my local machine. And what I've got here are the endpoints that we could see here in Swagger Hub. And for each of these endpoints, some of the Tyk middleware chain has been automatically configured so that we've got mock responses based upon the schema within the API description. We've got the allow list, and we've also got request validation where appropriate, again, where there was. So now with the Tyk OAS, we will validate the entire request, including the headers, parameters, body. Previously, Tyk was limited to just validating the payload on requests. So having deployed this, if you recall, the API description was recommending the use of auth token. So this has been automatically configured. So what I need to do in order to call this is to generate a key. So I will generate a key for my new API. One moment. And I'll grab that. And then I will come into Postman. And so here in Postman, I've already pre-filled the listen path. I shall put my key in. And that didn't work because it's a demo effect. Nothing ever works for me first time. So what have I done? That should have worked. Oh, I tested this just now and it was working. So what's not working?
Is it the token that might have expired, or
no? I've just used that token.
Okay.
Oh, it's because I've not set the mock response up correctly. Okay. I have set the mock response up correctly. This is frustrating. Apologies, everybody. Let me move on. What I wanted to show you is, is the API working, which it does. And this is very simple. It's a very simple API. It's just going to give a mock response. what I want to show you here is the API definition within Tyk, which, as mentioned, is now, this is displaying in YAML. I can choose to convert it into JSON. So this is one of the improvements in 5.8, where we can switch seamlessly between JSON and YAML depending upon your preferred method of operation. And this is exactly the API definition that I imported. Say my API designer developer he's added a new endpoint now in the API. So now we're on version 101. There's a new endpoint on here. And what I want to do now is just update my API. I don't need a new version because what we're doing here is we're still in the development phase for this API. So what I can do is I can actually import over the top of this API the updated OpenAPI description. And now this is updated in here. And when we look in my list of endpoints, we can see I've now gained the reviews endpoint that was added from the original API. So that's gone in. It's the same key. If my key was working, it would now work properly for me, but it doesn't want to. Yeah, going well so far. There we are. So this one's working. So this is the new endpoint that's been added in this updated OpenAPI description. Now, if I wanted to show you this, I do apologize. So this is the products endpoint, which is expecting an integer, assuming this is still working. Oh, nothing's working for me today. Excellent. I wanted to show you there the request validation, which has decided not to work for me. So I will move on. The aim there is that where the request validation middleware has automatically configured itself based upon the schema within the API definition. And I can see what's gone wrong, but I'm not going to fix it right now. And so we have that ability from your OpenAPI description to generate an API in Tyk, deploy it, serve traffic instantly, and then you can actually update that same API in Tyk with an updated OpenAPI description without actually affecting, you don't need a new version, it doesn't affect the traffic, the key still works, it's literally just updated the configuration of the OpenAPI description. So if I come in here, what we've got, looking at the full Tyk API description at the top here, this is your OpenAPI description, the OAS part. And then down below, we have all of the Tyk specific configuration in the Tyk vendor extension, which is all the way down here. Actually, I can't see all of my screen. So here we have the Tyk vendor extension, which is the specific configuration. So it's configuring a mock response based upon the examples in the OpenAPI spec. There it's configuring the request validation. Here's all of the configuration around the specific to Tyk. But everything above this is still that OpenAPI spec. If I come in to my designer, which is a much nicer interface, I can choose to edit my API. I can add middleware, all of Tyk's different middleware out in the middleware chain. I can add an endpoint. So if I choose to add a hello world endpoint, into my API, and then if I add in here, put it on the allow list, and I want to add a mock response, which I will configure manually. And we will say, hello world. Can save this. So I've added this endpoint into my API description. If we come back here, hopefully, all things being equal, we'll get the response. So that's a good sign. That's working. Something's going well. But what's really interesting here is I can actually export the full API definition or just the OpenAPI description. And I will export that. I will open this. And then here we have that OpenAPI description, which was based upon the original. The only thing that's changed now is that we will have in here my hello world. So you can update, you can extend your OpenAPI description within Tyk, but then you can export, or you can update it outside Tyk and bring it in. So that's the basics of working with the OpenAPI description. What I wanted to show you now is how versioned APIs work with Tyk OAS. So here I have another simple API, and this one we've added versioning to, so I've actually got two versions of the API. Those of you who experience with Tyk Classic, the way Tyk's always worked will be aware that when you have versioned APIs with Tyk historically, there's one API definition and all the config for all the different versions is held in that API definition. What this means is a lot of the configuration is shared, and you don't have full flexibility to configure your different API versions differently. Now with Tyk OAS, what we've done is we've introduced the concept that each version has its own API definition, and we have a sort of a base or parent API and then child APIs that are routed by requests being sent into the main API. So what I've got here is my first version, which is my default, my base API. This is secured with auth token again. And my second API, we decided not to have authentication on this one. This isn't something you can do previously with Tyk. We've got full flexibility still as to what you're using for your version identifier, the location of your version identifier. It can be in a header, it can be a parameter, it can be in the URL. And if I create, no, don't need to create a key. If I come to my coffee shop, yes, this is the one I want. So if I access API version 1 and I try and hit the menu endpoint, you can see it's asking me for authorization. And if I try and hit just version 2 at the same address here, then because I've removed the need for authorization in my second version, the request has got through and given me a response. So just a very quick example there of the fact that you can now configure basically anything in a Tyk OAS versioned API. And here are my two versions here, and I can choose which is the default, which would be the one that's addressed if, for example, the caller doesn't select a version. So that's a quick intro to versioning with Tyk OAS. Next thing I wanted to show you is something that's a new feature that we've added, which is support for, if I can find the right window, support for multi-part API definitions. So a key feature with when developing with OpenAPI descriptions is that you can have your API description split across multiple files. So here I've got a simple weather API, and each of the paths has been developed by a separate team. They've developed it in its own file. So we've got the current forecast, the historical location data, and then we have this main OpenAPI description that actually makes reference to the other files. So if we come in and we search for the reference, we can see that this main file actually references out to these extra files. And what this means is that you can construct your OpenAPI description from multiple components that can be configured by different teams. You could have shared fragments, maybe owned by certain teams that are shared across multiple APIs in your portfolio. So this is quite a complex sort of concept. It's really powerful. And what we've got here in Tyk now is the ability to import. I'm going to, as you can see, we can import OpenAPI by pasting in the actual text, importing from a file, or pulling from a URL if you're hosting your API descriptions on a server. Now I'm just working locally today, so importing from file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a zip file, an archive that contains the files I just showed you. And what Tyk will do is it will pull in these files. It's going to create an API on Tyk. I've got all the same options as normal. What's happened here is we've created this central API definition, and it's pulled in and resolved all of those external references. If I view the API definition, it has actually constructed a consolidated OpenAPI description with all of those components in. Now, of course, we using the technique that I showed you before, if, for example, one of the paths was updated, we could then re-import the OpenAPI description, update this API definition, and continue. So that has, with one click, imported that archive of containing that multi-part API definition. Okay. So that's a few of the different things working around OAS. And now that we've reached this point where you can configure all the different aspects of the Tyk gateway, all of its capabilities, we've introduced load balancing support. The upstream authentication is a new feature I'm going to come to in a moment. Configuration of service discovery, all the different config. There are a few things that haven't yet made it into the UI, which you'll find here in other settings. But all of this can be configured within the API definition using our sort of enhanced, more user-friendly, human-readable approach now within the Tyk vendor extension. So using our documentation, you'd be able to add the necessary simple configuration to enable the different elements that aren't yet available in the UI. Okay, so the next thing is for those of you who have already been using Tyk for some time, you've got an existing portfolio of APIs using our legacy Tyk Classic format. Here's one I made earlier. Here is a Tyk Classic API, very familiar to those of you who've been with Tyk for some time, and we thank you for your time with us. Here is the API designer. Here is the API definition for your classic API. And what we've now got, of course, we want you to be using OAS. OAS is much more powerful. It unlocks new functionality, new features. So we've given an easy way using Tyk Dashboard to convert over to Tyk OAS. Now, this is a process that will replace that classic API in my dashboard, which means that it will continue to serve traffic. I don't need to reversion. I don't need to generate new keys. Everything will work exactly the same. But of course, going directly to the classic, from the classic to the OAS, probably not recommended. And what we recommend is you take the staging approach. So when we take the staging approach, we will, so with these two options, we will create a staged version of the classic API. Now this is, as we can see, an OAS API. We can look at the API definition. We've generated a OpenAPI description. We've generated the Tyk vendor extension. This is all configuration taken from that classic API. Now you can see that we've put in a prefix here. This is deployed on my gateway. It will serve traffic. I can test it. I can make sure that I'm happy this is behaving exactly as I expect my API to behave. There are some subtle differences that are in our documentation about the way that the classic and the OpenAPI, the OAS APIs are handled. Just a couple of very minor things around the versioning in particular, and mock responses. Typically they're used obviously during development, not in production. But having done this, having tested this, made any changes I need to do within my API, I can then promote this. There's a warning, are you sure you want to do this? I promote this into my gateway. This has now replaced the classic API. It's inherited the same API ID. It's inherited its place in the database. The auth keys will continue to work with this API. It just happens now to be an OpenAPI format. And of course, it being in Tyk OpenAPI format means that you can export an OpenAPI description. Now, this is a very, very basic API definition. So the OAS is incredibly simple. But what we've got here is that ability with a couple of clicks to generate an OpenAPI description from your Tyk Classic API, which you could then use in your in your software flow, in your documentation. So that's quite a nice feature, we think, being able to generate that from that classic API is quite cool. Okay. One thing I hadn't mentioned, which Buddha did highlight, is the ability to use our I'm expecting HTTP bin is not going to work for me today because it's one of those days. Templates. So what we have now with OAS, exclusive to OAS, are the concept of API templates. And I'm going to generate using my simple rate limit template of this new API that's just going to target HTTP bin. So I created my API here. It's all ready to go. Rate limiting has been automatically configured from my template, which I'll show you in just a moment. And my API is not working because nothing ever works for me.
I think there was a red line there. If you just scroll down a little bit, just a little bit further.
There we are. Got to put on a listen one. So obviously I need to tell Tyk where to listen for traffic. Would help, wouldn't it? Okay. Perfect. Thank you for spotting that. I'll just show you the template before we actually test that. So here's the templates that I've created. And it's very simple. All a template is an API definition. It's the Tyk OAS API definition. We can see this is what it consists of. I can edit my template. I can configure any aspect of my API from here. I can add endpoints. I can do whatever I like here, and it will save this not as won't publish this as an API, but it will then be the basis, that starting point for creating my new API. So I've got this that we've just generated with the rate limit, and all things being equal, it's not going to work. Let me have a go. There we are. See, HTTP bin's not working. Never works when you demo. But if I send multiple requests, I will still hit my rate limit, which came in from the template. Okay, I think the final thing that I wanted to show you is our enhanced upstream authentication. So as Buddha explained, this is intended for Tyk to have stronger integrations with partner services, with your own services that have existing security, in particular OAuth client credentials flow. That's the main purpose for this, and that machine-to-machine integration. Obviously, you may be surfacing partner services to your customers or internally to your own internal API consumers. And what Tyk can do now is can act as an OAuth client in such a integration. So what I've got here is the Nobel Prize Institute has an API that they publish where you can get access. It's free access. It's not secured. Access to find out all about the different Nobel Prizes, laureates, winners over the last 125 years. Some interesting stuff in there. What I've done is I've extracted their API and created a facade API in Tyk. Now, this has endpoints matching to the Nobel Prize service, and we're just proxying through requests to their different endpoints. And I've created two versions, which we will see. One which I have called insecure and one which I've called secure. The insecure one should be is accessible from this address. They're both accessible from this address. This is my version controllers between the insecure and the secure versions. So my insecure version will go straight through and tell me who won the Nobel Peace Prize in the year 2000. So there's lots of information here. But if I go for my secure version, blocked, I'm not providing authorization. So when I look at my secure version, what I've actually done is I have configured it to expect an OAuth token. It's going to use Okta. So I've set up a developer account on Okta where it will be introspecting and checking the token that's provided using my client ID and secret. So now I'm acting as if the Nobel Prize server was secured by OAuth. So how do I then integrate a Tyk API with this? So this is where my authorized API comes in. For this API, I've set my upstream authentication on, configured this to use OAuth, client credentials. I've provided the credentials, that client ID and secret required for that flow. And I also just provide the token URL on my Okta server. So there's my authorization server. What's going to happen is Tyk's going to present these credentials, send them to obtain a token, and then it will pass that token on to the target, which was my secured API. That will then use that token and introspect it using the Okta service. I hope. So we're hitting this here, but what I've actually done is I have protected my authorized API with an auth token. So what I'm really showing you here is how you can secure end-to-end from your partner API, from your upstream secured OAuth secured API through to your users who maybe you're using auth token with them. Because if you're using auth token for multiple APIs, or you could be using a separate OAuth. It's entirely up to you how you're authenticating this API, but the key thing is it's bridging to that partner API. So I need to come in and create a key for my authorized API. So I grab my key and I come in to my authorized API. Just initially, I'll send without a key, authorization field's missing. When I put that key in, takes a while because it's negotiating with Okta, but having completed that negotiation, then my upstream has accepted that authorization and provided back the information again about the prize winner in 2000. And I think that's the end of my planned demo, but bang on time, I think.
Pretty much, yeah. Awesome. We've got a couple of questions. Thanks everyone for sending those in. I think some of which Andy have already responded to. Kishore, I saw a couple of questions coming from you. I think I've tried to explain some of that context variable aspects of it, but we will confirm that and get back to you in terms of how you can use it for upstream authentication. So we go into, okay, one of the questions that I'm seeing here, Alex has asked if they export the full API definition description, is it possible to export as YAML file and use this for Tyk operators? So I'm guessing the
Yes.
easy answer is yes. All right, that was easy peasy then. All right, we've got a couple more questions. In the Q&A section, there is a question about, does the mock response conform to the JSON schema definition of the API definition? Um, okay, sure.
Yes, if I understand that correctly, yes, it does.
Cool. All right. Then we have, if we work with plugins, can we define it at the resource level instead of the API level?
There's no change at the moment. There's no difference between the classic and the OAS at the moment. So there is one Go plugin that you can define at the resource level, at the endpoint level. I think that's at the end of the processing chain immediately before the proxy. But the others are still at the API level, but it's definitely on our on our roadmap to overhaul that plugin experience. It's definitely something we're looking for improving.
Awesome. And the final question is, when are we potentially expecting the LTS edition of what we've got?
Yeah, so 5.8 will become LTS basically now. We're just in the process of we're deep in the release process for the first patch on 5.8. And the aim is to sort of update that LTS information as that comes out. But I can confirm 5.8 will be LTS, is effectively LTS now from May.
Great, thank you. That seems to be the last of the questions. I have quickly just started a final poll here just to know, how do we help you out next? What is it that you care about right immediately? So feel free to tell us a little bit more about what's the next step that you're looking to take here, whether it's a trial, whether it's a demo. How do we help you understand a little bit more about your use case specifically, or there is something else that we might be able to help you out with? So do let us know. We are super excited to pretty much help you take that next step in this particular journey. I believe I have one final slide, if I'm not wrong, just so that you can perhaps sign up for a trial immediately if you so desired today. So let me just show you the QR code in case you are here, ready and available. Feel free to just sign up. Otherwise, if you just go to tyk.io, you would see on the top right-hand corner, there is a sign up, there's a trial. All of that is available very, very easily. It's a free trial, so you can just get started with it immediately. So feel free to do so. We are very excited to hear your experience with Tyk 5.8, your experiencing the new OAS capabilities that we have brought in, as well as some of the others which are available as part of the release notes. And tell us, was this a moment of celebration? Was it a moment of unlocking new opportunities, or there is something that you might want to see more of, perhaps? So do tell us. It is part of our release process. I mentioned earlier on, your feedback matters quite a lot. The way you experience a product matters quite a lot, and the kind of outcomes you're able to unlock for you matters quite a lot for us as well. So with that, I am going to bring us to a close for today. Hopefully I can stop sharing. There we go. Any final questions from anybody else? Otherwise, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic experience so far. Thank you so much, Andy, for the great demo. I know there were a couple of hiccups there in terms of one of those API calls, but that's fine. I would say if the demo goes 90% well, I'll take that as a win. So well done there. So thank you so much. And again, if you've got specific questions from a demo standpoint, do feel free to reach out to us. We'll be doing more of these as we go along. So thank you so much. Final call out. If you are going to be at API Days New York next week, do say hi to us. We are going to be there, pretty much a large team. We've got 3 different sessions that we're going to be a part of. We do have an open API section as well that, if you're interested in, feel free to join us. So if you're there, tell us. We'll be happy to see you in person. So with that, Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely rest of the day and look forward to the weekend. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Andy.